Have you ever stopped to consider that deep down, everything you were taught about attracting women might be wrong? They said it was enough to be romantic, kind, and predictable. But reality, and Machiavelli already knew this, is far more cruel. Politics must be guided by reality, not ideals. And reality shows that it's not the most handsome or the richest who arouse immediate desire. It's the one who understands the invisible codes of the human mind, the one who applies the calculated use of force even in a look or a silence. What no one told you is that there's a shortcut. Small, almost imperceptible gestures capable of turning the tide in seconds. An ordinary man can become magnetic without changing anything other than the way he positions himself. The end justifies the means, and the means here isn't overly pleasing, but learning to arouse respect, curiosity, and emotional tension, the three ingredients that fuel true desire. You may doubt it now, but in the next few minutes you'll realize there's no magic, no cheap trick. There's strategy, and when you apply it, you'll understand why it's better to be feared than loved in certain moments, and how this paradox creates instant chemistry. The silent gesture that effortlessly sparks attraction. There's an almost invisible detail that separates an ordinary man from someone who exudes instant magnetism. The silent gesture. It doesn't have to be theatrical. It doesn't have to draw attention. Often, it's something as simple as holding your gaze steady for a few extra seconds, squaring your shoulders while walking, or sustaining a strategic pause before speaking. It's in this calculated silence that Machiavelli's power is born, when he reminded us that politics should be guided by reality, not ideals. And reality shows that the body speaks louder than any rehearsed words. A man who learns to use the silent gesture understands that the end justifies the means, even in a casual encounter. It's not about manipulation, but about conveying security without needing to beg for attention. A woman realizes, even without rational understanding, that there is a man there who acts with virtue and fortuna in the very way he is present. This magnetism isn't learned in crash courses, but cultivated through the daily practice of observing oneself in the mirror, adjusting small details, and above all, trusting one's own presence. The silent gesture is, at its core, the opposite of haste. It's when a man doesn't rush to speak, doesn't rush to fill the silence, doesn't contort himself to appear interesting. Imagine two men entering a room. One arrives laughing loudly, gesturing non-stop, trying to prove himself. The other simply walks, looks around calmly, greets simply, and sits down as if he knows he doesn't need to compete for space. Which of the two arouses more curiosity? The answer seems obvious, but few apply it in real life. This discreet attitude generates a silent tension that is far more powerful than cheap compliments or rehearsed phrases. As Machiavelli said, it is better to be feared than loved. And in this context, feared isn't literal fear, but the automatic respect that arises when someone effortlessly conveys authority. It is this aura that keeps a man from being hated because he doesn't show off excessively, simply standing firm in his own essence. Applying this to everyday life doesn't require fancy techniques, but conscious practice. The next time you're in a conversation, try remaining silent for a few seconds before responding. Notice how this changes the dynamic. The person leans in, pays more attention, awaits your words with greater anticipation. This is the calculated use of force. It's not about talking a lot, but about using each gesture and each word as if they were rare. Another simple exercise is to practice posture in mundane situations, on the subway, in the supermarket, even walking down the street. The man who gets used to holding his body firmly, his gaze calmly, and silence naturally creates a magnetic field around himself. This is a decision based on true human nature. Everyone is attracted to what conveys security, and everyone moves away from what conveys insecurity. But there's something even more curious. This invisible difference between the ignored man and the desired man, which we'll explore next. The invisible difference between the ignored man and the desired one. The line that separates the ignored man from the desired man is so thin that many don't even realize when they've crossed it. It's not about looks, money, or catchphrases. What truly creates this difference is how they manage their own energy. The ignored man is the one who constantly tries to prove his worth, while the desired man acts as if that worth were already evident. This subtlety is a direct reflection of Machiavelli's thinking. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. The reality is that insistence repels and naturalness attracts. The ignored man clings to the need for validation, and this comes across as desperation. The desired man, on the other hand, doesn't need to beg, because he knows that the end justifies the means, and that true seduction happens in the absence of effort. The difference is invisible but powerful, because it stems from an internal point, the silent conviction that there is nothing to lose. A simple example helps illustrate. Imagine two text messages, one written in haste with exaggerated emojis, trying to elicit an immediate response, the other short, direct, and calm, conveying no anxiety, only firmness. Which of the two generates more interest? The ignored man is the one who conveys neediness even in a message. The desired one, on the other hand, understands the calculated use of force and knows that less is more. He values her time because he values his own. This balance creates a sense of scarcity, and everything that is scarce is more valuable. Therefore, in social gatherings, the desired man may even speak less. But when he does speak, everyone listens. He applies Machiavelli's logic in a practical way. It is better to be feared than loved, because silent respect opens doors that flattery never would. This invisible difference can be cultivated in everyday life through small choices. For example, not responding to messages immediately when you're busy, pursuing your own hobbies instead of dropping everything for someone else, or even saying no when necessary. These attitudes demonstrate constant adaptability, a trait that arouses desire because it demonstrates independence. Women quickly sense when a man isn't willing to sacrifice his life just to please. This attitude creates a contrast that magnetizes. And it is in this contrast that the invisible strength is revealed. The ignored must beg for attention. The desired receives attention without asking. But this power doesn't come solely from firmness. It also stems from the ability to transform one's vulnerability into magnetism, which brings us to the next point: how to turn vulnerability into magnetism. Most men believe vulnerability is synonymous with weakness. This is the fatal error that turns them into rigid versions of themselves, incapable of creating real connection. The magnetic man, however, knows that well-used vulnerability is a strategic weapon, a living example of the calculated use of strength. By exposing a weakness honestly, without dramatization or playing the victim, he inspires trust. This happens because in true human nature, everyone recognizes the courage behind admitting imperfections. Machiavelli taught that the appearance of virtue is often more important than the virtue itself. Showing vulnerability without losing your composure is precisely that. Appearing human without neglecting your strength. It's when a man tells a story of failure but laughs at it, showing he's grown from the experience, that magnetism emerges. It's not weakness, it's authenticity honed by trust. Consider the contrast. A man who strives for perfection all the time, avoiding any flaw, ends up conveying artificiality. However, someone who admits, for example, that he was nervous on a first date or that he messed up on an important project, but shows how he bounced back, conveys something much more powerful: resilience. This is virtù and fortuna in action, turning falls into narratives of overcoming. Imagine someone saying at a dinner party, "I've already missed a great opportunity because I was afraid to take a risk, but it was that loss that forced me to change my mindset." This phrase doesn't generate pity, but rather admiration. It proves that man is aware, learns, and adapts. Machiavelli reminded us that the end justifies the means. And in this context, the means is vulnerability transformed into a bridge of connection. It's not about exposing everything, but about choosing what to share to create magnetism. Putting this into practice requires discernment. A useful exercise is to list 3 situations in your life where you failed, but that helped you evolve. Then, practice telling these stories in conversations in a light-hearted way without self-pity. This practice creates narratives that generate instant empathy. Another point is not being afraid to say, "I don't know," when you don't have an answer. This simple phrase, rather than diminishing, can increase respect because it demonstrates authenticity. The secret is not to use vulnerability as a crutch, but as proof that you are alive, human, and aware. This generates magnetism because it creates a contrast with the mask of perfection that so many insist on wearing. And if vulnerability can attract, the opposite is also true. There is a subtle error that destroys any desire in seconds, and that is precisely what we need to talk about now. The mistake that eliminates any desire in seconds. There's an almost imperceptible gesture that, when it appears, destroys any chemistry in seconds: the need for explicit approval. This is the classic mistake of the man who, instead of conveying security, constantly seeks applause. It's when he stares intently to see if she laughed at the joke, when he repeats a phrase hoping for validation, or when he overcorrects himself to avoid appearing wrong. This behavior, however subtle, communicates insecurity, and insecurity is the poison of desire. Machiavelli already warned that it is better to be feared than loved, and in this case, the practical translation is simple. It is better to be respected for your posture than adored through flattery. A woman quickly senses when a man's energy is based on excessive pleasing. Politics guided by reality shows that no one desires what conveys desperation, no matter how polite or hard-working it appears. This error also appears in small, everyday interactions. A man who, during a date, rushes to pay the bill just to impress, but unnaturally comes across as artificial. What makes the difference is not the action itself, but the visible intention behind it. When there's a need to prove value, the gesture loses its magnetism. This is where the concept of calculated use of force comes in. Giving without seeming to buy, acting without seeming to beg. A practical example is offering something simple, like recommending a transformative book you recently read, instead of trying to buy admiration with grand gestures. The error isn't in giving, but in giving to be accepted. A man who puts himself in this position falls into the trap of being quickly ignored because the woman feels the weight of the forced effort. Avoiding this mistake requires awareness and practice. A powerful technique is learning to sustain brief silences after speaking without rushing to explain or justify. This pause conveys calm and confidence, 2 irresistible signals. Another practice is to review everyday attitudes. Before acting, ask yourself if you're doing it out of conviction or simply to impress. This self-analysis creates the constant adaptability that differentiates the magnetic man from the needy man. Machiavelli reminded us that the end justifies the means, but here the end is the solidity of desire, and the means must be constructed with authenticity. Each time the error of needing approval is avoided, a man strengthens his presence. And this presence is precisely what paves the way for a next level of power, Machiavelli's secret to turning the emotional tide. Machiavelli's secret to turning the emotional game around. Few understand that Machiavelli wasn't just talking about kings and princes, but about anyone who wanted to understand the human mind. His secret to turning the emotional tide is simple and brutal. Never give up all your cards at once. In the realm of seduction, this means leaving room for the other side to also invest. The man who gives everything at the beginning, attention, time, confessions, becomes predictable. And predictability kills desire. The secret is to apply the appearance of virtue, showing interest without giving in completely. This balance creates curiosity, and curiosity is the engine of desire. When Machiavelli said that the end justifies the means, he was reminding us that strategy is worth more than impulse. A man who knows how to balance his delivery with silences, pauses, and even small absences turns the tables in his favor. In practice, this can be seen in something simple, knowing when to end a conversation, even if it's going well. The magnetic man understands that leaving at its peak creates more impact than dragging it out until it's boring. It's the same reasoning that makes a good series end unexpectedly, leaving everyone hungry for more. This is the calculated use of force applied to the emotional realm. Imagine a dinner where he leads an engaging conversation, but instead of dragging it out too long, he decides to end it early with a smile and a subtle promise to continue. The effect is to leave her mind occupied with thoughts of the next encounter. Here, he shows that he doesn't depend on the interaction, but rather values it. This is a decision based on true human nature. Everyone desires what seems scarce. This secret also involves role reversal. Instead of waiting to be chosen, the man who applies Machiavelli acts as one who also evaluates. He listens attentively but observes silently, as if he knows that the power lies in deciding, not just in pleasing. This creates an invisible dynamic in which the woman feels the need to show herself desirable as well. It's the practical application of the principle that it's better to be feared than loved, as silent respect generates more impact than unconditional acceptance. This subtle reversal changes the energy of the game. But be careful, if reversing the game creates magnetism, there's an even more common pitfall, one that explains why the nice guy almost never creates real chemistry. Why the nice guy never creates chemistry. The nice guy believes that being excessively kind is the key to winning over someone. He lives trapped in the ideal that endlessly pleasing people generates desire, but ignores the reality that Machiavelli already pointed out. Politics should be guided by reality, not ideals. And reality is harsh. Excessive kindness comes across as a lack of personality. When a man molds himself too much to another, erasing his opinions and desires, he ceases to be perceived as an individual. This kills attraction. The nice guy is always available, always ready to compromise, always avoiding conflict. It seems like a virtue, but it's just fear in disguise. He believes that by being loved, he will gain respect, but the opposite is actually true. The absence of limits turns respect into disinterest. This subtle error shows why avoiding being hated doesn't mean being nice, but rather being firm without being aggressive. See how this translates into everyday life. The nice guy is the one who immediately responds to every message, who cancels appointments to be available, who never dares to disagree. At first glance, he seems perfect, but subconsciously, he breeds boredom. The human mind, driven by curiosity, seeks challenge, not submission. That's why Machiavelli said it's better to be feared than loved. Respect keeps the game going, while excessive adoration tires. The nice guy doesn't create chemistry because he doesn't generate emotional tension. There's no room for mystery or scarcity. He doesn't employ calculated force, expends all his energy seeking approval, and in the end, becomes predictable. It's like a book that reveals the entire plot on the first page. no one feels the urge to keep reading. The way out of this dilemma isn't to abandon kindness, but to balance it with firmness. The magnetic man practices constant adaptability. He knows how to be attentive, but also say no when necessary. He knows how to compromise on small points, but stands his ground on things that truly matter. This blend creates an irresistible aura. Because it blends care with authority, he maintains the appearance of virtue, but doesn't lose his own identity. To apply this, it's helpful to practice small disagreements in small talk, not to fight, but to show that he has his own voice. This contrast builds respect and, consequently, desire. The nice guy never creates chemistry because he gives everything without asking for anything in return. But there's a quick and sure way to reverse this. Understanding the psychological trigger that accelerates female connection. The psychological trigger that accelerates female connection. There's a simple yet powerful trigger capable of accelerating any female connection: selective validation. It's not flattery, it's not saying yes to everything, but specifically recognizing what truly deserves attention. The human brain, guided by true nature, reacts intensely when it receives unexpected and genuine validation. Imagine, for example, instead of praising a woman's obvious beauty, highlighting the way she defends her ideas in a discussion. This unexpected validation activates a deep emotional trigger. She feels truly seen beyond the surface. Machiavelli would say this is a classic example of calculated force, not giving everything, but delivering at the right point. A man who understands this accelerates connection because he shows discernment, and discernment is rare. This trigger also works because it creates contrast. While most people get lost in generic compliments, the magnetic man chooses specific words that ring true. It's as if to say, I don't just see what everyone else sees, I notice what you never imagined anyone would notice. This stance creates the appearance of virtue because it conveys depth without seeming manipulative. And here's the key. Selectivity shows that the man isn't handing out approval to just anyone, but that she's achieved something unique. It's Machiavelli's logic applied to emotions. The end justifies the means, and the means in this case is the art of validating only what's essential. This accelerates desire because it awakens the feeling of exclusivity, which is one of the greatest currencies of value in relationships. In practice, applying this trigger can start with simple exercises. Instead of saying, "You look beautiful today," try observing something that almost no one notices, like the way she engages when telling a story, or the courage to defend an unpopular opinion. This kind of observation creates an immediate connection because it touches deeper layers of her identity. It's virtù and fortuna used subtly. Virtù lies in choosing the compliment with precision, and fortuna lies in the unexpected impact it generates. This trigger works because selective validation is rare in a world saturated with empty words. And when the rare appears, it's desired. But there's something even more powerful, the ability to use absence, not presence, as fuel to increase desire. How to use absence to increase desire. Few understand that absence is as powerful as presence. The man who masters this principle understands what Machiavelli called the calculated use of force. Being available all the time doesn't create desire, it creates saturation. Mystery arises precisely from the pause, from the space between one encounter and another, from the gap that sets the imagination working. It is in this silence that the female mind projects, imagines, idealizes, and it is there that magnetism grows. When a man strategically disappears, not out of disinterest but to live his own life, he conveys that he is not dependent. This decision, based on true human nature, is simple. Everything that becomes rare gains value. Just as gold isn't scattered in the streets, The magnetic man isn't available at every second. He creates scarcity. The most common mistake is to confuse absence with neglect. Purposeful disappearance isn't about disappearing rudely, but about leaving space for the other person to miss you. It's the difference between ignoring and knowing when to withdraw at the right time. Imagine an engaging conversation, but one that ends with a smile and a "let's continue this later." This pause builds anticipation. It's like a sitcom ending on a high note. Everyone wants to watch the next one. This is the appearance of virtue applied in practice, appearing available but never predictable. Machiavelli reminded us that it's better to be feared than loved. And here the fear isn't fear, but the unconscious respect of knowing one isn't always available. A well-measured absence is a silent reminder of value. In practice, using absence requires constant adaptability. There are moments of intense presence where connection is created, and moments of retreat where desire multiplies. It's like fire. If fed too much, it suffocates. If forgotten, it dies. The man who masters this art becomes unforgettable because it creates contrast. Small, applicable actions, not responding instantly all the time, maintaining your own hobbies, cultivating friendships and personal projects. This shows that your life doesn't revolve around gaining attention. This balance creates a magnetic aura that only grows with time. Absence is an invisible power strategy, and it's precisely this territory we're entering now by revealing the power strategy women don't admit in public. The power strategy that women don't admit in public. There's a silent strategy that almost no woman admits publicly, but all respond to: emotional leadership. A man who knows how to direct the energy of an interaction without losing himself in hesitation awakens natural desire. This leadership isn't authoritarianism, but calm firmness. It's when he chooses a restaurant without fear of making a mistake, conducts a conversation naturally, or makes small decisions without seeming dependent on her validation. This posture conveys what Machiavelli called virtù and fortuna. Virtù lies in the ability to act, and fortuna lies in the positive impact that decision generates. Politics guided by reality shows that security attracts and insecurity repels. Therefore, a man who leads commands respect, while one who seeks approval for every step generates fatigue. This strategy is a paradox. Often in public, the narrative is that they prefer absolute equality in every detail of the interaction. But the emotional reality is different. Attraction grows when there is leadership. This doesn't mean dominating, but having clarity of direction. It's the calculated use of force applied to everyday life. The man who chooses a path but remains open to dialogue exudes confidence and flexibility. He practices constant adaptability. He knows when to yield and when to hold firm. It's like a captain commanding a ship on the open sea. Passengers may have opinions, but ultimately they want to trust that he knows where he's going. This energy awakens something that is rarely said out loud, but is always felt. A practical example. On a date, instead of asking 20 times, "Where do you want to go?" a magnetic man might simply suggest, "I know a place you'll love, let's go." This attitude conveys clarity, and clarity is attractive. Sure, he can listen to preferences, but he doesn't transfer the entire weight of the decision. This is the invisible difference that creates desire. Calm direction. It's better to be feared than loved in this sense, because fear here is respect, the certainty that he won't waver when faced with simple choices. This strategy works because women, deep down, seek men who carry direction. But there's something even more subtle. An unexpected, almost imperceptible detail capable of making any date memorable. The unexpected detail that makes any encounter memorable. The encounters that remain etched in memory are rarely the most expensive or the most planned. What truly makes an impression is the unexpected detail, that simple gesture that surprises because it deviates from the predictable script. This detail can be as small as bringing a book you mentioned in a previous conversation, or preparing a song you know she likes. This is where Machiavelli's genius comes in. The end justifies the means. The goal isn't to impress with grandeur, but to create an emotional impact through something seemingly trivial. The unexpected detail works because it shows attention, and attention today is a rare commodity. The man who notices and acts on something subtle demonstrates that he truly listened. And when someone feels seen this way, desire multiplies. This gesture doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to be authentic. Imagine a dinner where, at the end, he pulls a handwritten note from his pocket, mentioning a phrase she herself said. Simple, unexpected, and powerful. This conveys the appearance of virtue. It seems like politeness, but in practice, it's strategy, the calculated use of force. While many spend fortunes on generic gifts, this memorable detail costs next to nothing, but has incalculable emotional value. A decision based on true human nature shows that we are moved by what touches us deeply, not by what impresses superficially. It's this detail that will later be shared with friends, remembered with a smile, and associated with a deep feeling. To apply this, simply cultivate the habit of deep listening. Every conversation offers clues, a childhood memory, a favorite place, a secret fear. Transforming these clues into gestures is what creates unforgettable encounters. The person who masters this art demonstrates constant adaptability because they realize that there is no single formula. What works for one person may not work for another. The unexpected detail is, in fact, the materialization of silent respect. It's as if to say, I saw you beyond the surface, and there is no desire more powerful than that which arises from this feeling. This is the final point of the journey, from the initial silent gesture to the memorable detail. Now, we've finished all the topics. Now that you understand each of these principles, I ask you, will you continue repeating the same mistakes, or will you apply the strategy that few have the courage to use? Because deep down, the emotional game isn't won by the nicest, nor by the most talkative. It's won by those who understand true human nature and learn to play with it, not against it. If you've made it this far, you've already realized that Machiavelli was right. The end justifies the means. The silent gesture, the calculated absence, the vulnerability transformed into magnetism. These are all weapons hidden before your eyes. But what good is knowing if you don't apply it? How long will you wait to take control? From now on, every conversation, every encounter, every glance can be an opportunity to change the game. But the decision is yours. Would you rather be ignored or be remembered? Would you rather be just another person or be the man who leaves his mark? If this content resonated with you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue learning to master these invisible codes. Because this was just the beginning, and the secrets that follow can transform not only your love life, but the entire way you position yourself in the world.